Thank you for pressing start on episode 17 of Underplayed, KZUM's indie video game podcast. Today we have 2 secret games, followed by a review of our featured game, Kentucky Route Zero TV Edition. Here on Underplayed, we review indie games of all kinds, the games with small budgets but big hearts, the lesser-known experiences with imaginative ideas. I'm Bopo, and joining me is my player 2, DiscoCola. What is going on?
Nothing much, man. Just cleaning off the mold from my machines and getting ready to go. How are you?
I am doing just fine. My giant avian brother, my ailing antique delivery man, my surrealist folk fantasy. Those are, of course, references to Kentucky Route Zero TV Edition, our featured game on this episode. I have to say, since it was a good topic last episode, this game did not make my hands hurt. So we're still in that pattern of game makes my hands hurt, game doesn't make my hands hurt.
What's next is what?
Momodora.
Season 2, episode 7? Yeah, your hands are going to hurt.
So Momodora, you've played Momodora. You know my hands will hurt.
So.
We've entered the pattern, so it only makes sense.
I don't think it's going to be like Hollow Knight or Celeste, but you are likely to cramp a little.
Okay. Well, I'm glad it's on the milder edge of things because, I got to hobble my way to the finish line of this season. We still got 4 episodes after this. So I did just finish Kentucky Route Zero TV Edition last night. Actually.
Congratulations.
So the night, but thank you. And you finished it just the other day, right?
Yes.
So it is fresh in our minds. I will say it has not marinated in a way that, actually we don't really let games marinate a lot in our minds because we do these episodes right after playing the games, but a lot to chew on with this game that I didn't expect. So we will still get into a lot of that stuff, but I think it does help to have it so fresh, having finished it just last night.
I think I would need it to be fresh in this case.
Yeah. So I'm actually glad we have this timing going on with this. Also wanted to ask, I realized I say Kentucky Route Zero. Do you say route
I don't
or
say
route?
Route. I say route.
You say route. I feel like maybe it's just where we are geographically, but I've always heard route.
Yeah.
In my life. But I think
now,
both are
now that you're saying it, we're at a radio station and they say, Route 66.
Yes,
So,
I know. So it makes me want to say route.
Snoot.
I think everywhere outside the U.S. they say route.
Yeah, maybe.
And now I'm going to be self-conscious about it. But you know what? Whatever you say, I won't judge you.
Yeah.
But just know that I might judge myself.
Well, floofty.
Bringing back those bug snacks curses. All right. Well, let's move on to our secret games.
Secret games. Secret games. Secret games. Secret games.
In Secret Games, we each review one indie game we've been playing by ourselves in secret since our last episode. We don't talk about our secret games in advance. We keep them a surprise for this very moment. We can choose any indie game as long as we haven't talked about it before. DiscoCola, we'll start with you, as it's probably a surprise to you that we're starting with you.
I'm shocked.
Yes. So let the mystery be no more. Reveal your secret game for episode 17.
My secret game comes from Amanita Design, and that game is called Creaks.
Oh, nice. I've heard of this. I think I've seen it on sale on various storefronts, and I think it has like a really nice kind of like hand-drawn look to it, like a lot of their games, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have that trailer.
Okay.
Creaks, simply put, is just a puzzle game. You play as a young man who is not named in this game, and he is just doing some work at his desk in his bedroom when a small earthquake reveals like a small crawl space hidden behind the wallpaper in his room. And in this crawl space is a ladder that leads to a massive underground tower. Another earthquake detaches the ladder from the crawl space, trapping this young man with kind of one option, and that's just to move downward. So within this dilapidated tower is a series of rooms with strange monsters that will kill you if you get too close. And these monsters resemble things from pug-type dogs to goats to jellyfish, and each of them behave in entirely different ways. However, each of them, when exposed to bright lights, these monsters will turn into pieces of furniture. And you can use those pieces of furniture as maybe steps to reach higher points or just to pass by safely, whereas they might have killed you if they were in their monster form. And your goal is to use those particular monsters' behaviors and moving toggles, levers, and switches to arrange lights and monsters in a way that will allow you to travel to the next room. In between most of these rooms, you're treated to a story that you can watch sort of unfold through cracks in the wall or in the floor. And essentially what that story is this world has these humanoid bird inhabitants, and this is their home. This tower, however, is being attacked by this like giant monster. Most of what you see are these birds searching for a way to stop this monster. But each of these birds seems to have like a different approach about it. One of them kind of is very obviously trying to use force. One of them thinks the answer lies within books. And another seems totally conflicted about stopping the monster at all for some reason. However, you are not interacting with these birds. You're simply watching. And that's about the gist of it, to be honest. Where this game really focuses most of its energy is on the puzzles. It will introduce you to a monster, and then you will have to solve a series of puzzles focused on that monster with variations for a few rooms, and then it will throw a new monster in, rinse, and repeat until the next monster. There's also some collectibles in this game, sort of. While many of them are just sort of in between rooms, there are paintings for you to find. These are animated paintings. Most just feature something moving like an arm or maybe like a swaying background piece or something. But some of them are actually interactive little mini games that follow the same visual style, which some of them can be fun and challenging. But I want to go ahead and go over some things that I like about the game. I think a lot of these puzzles are cleverly designed. I think puzzle games that teach a mechanic in a simple sanitary environment and then offer variations on that mechanic are ideal puzzle games, at least for me. Something that I touched on in our last episode with Celeste. However, I read some of the reviews of this game on Steam, and the main complaint has to do with difficulty, and many people found this game a little bit too easy. And I think if you're someone that mains puzzle games, that's probably true. This is not really going to offer a very significant challenge to puzzle gamers. I found it to be just right for myself. I only had to look up about 6 or 7 rooms. And one of those solutions only actually eluded me because there was a ledge that I couldn't see due to the heavy use of dark colors in this game. Speaking of, as always, I love Amanita Design's art style. It's always very distinctive. This features that hand-drawn, almost hand-drawn with a pen sort of look. And I love that. Very similar to Machinarium, another game that we played. But yeah, there's so much attention to detail. Each part of the world looks like it's lived in. There's like various pieces of clutter and adornments on the walls in the background.
Yes, and lots of just like texture and fine lines on
Yeah.
things along the hand-drawn pen look. That's kind of what I'm noticing about this. And it looks a lot like Braid,
Right.
which is kind of a classic indie game. That's kind of what is most similar in my mind to this. Or if you're familiar with other Amanita Design games as well.
Right. And I don't think there's a single, other than maybe some books, I don't think there's a single like reused visual element necessarily, other than, well, the monsters, of course. But
Mhm.
like as in terms of background and world, I don't think there's reused elements. And like as I'm going through this game, I'm kind of wondering if maybe if you printed out all of the rooms at scale, if you might be able to just like slap them together on a wall
Yeah.
and just have the entire
Hollow Knight style.
the entire map of the game like printed out on your wall. I'd be very interested to see if that's that's possible. I think it'd be a cool thing to see.
At the end of the trailer, it does do like a wide shot of the whole underground tower. And I wonder if that is to scale, if that is like a representation of it
Right.
all.
Yeah. I couldn't say. It does give you like a little map um, after you beat the game where you can select which room to start in.
Oh,
And it does look like it follows an in-scale path, but I'm not sure,
cool.
obviously. The last thing I want to touch on in the likes column is the music. Turn that up, my
Nice.
friend.
Okay.
Another thing Amanita Design always excels at is getting incredible music into their games. I told my story in the Machinarium episode. Go listen to it. I told my story about what that soundtrack means to me. When I found out about the game Creaks, the first thing I did was listen to the music, this time from Hidden Orchestra, and it didn't disappoint. So pretty much at this point, whether or not I pursue an Amanita game kind of depends mostly on the music. Things I don't like as much. The pacing, while I appreciate that there is a story and it does kind of have a satisfying payoff, there could have been fewer scenes overall, and then the story and its characters wouldn't have really lost anything for it, I don't think. I think there's just a little too much there just to have something in between each room, it seems like.
Yeah.
By extension, the character animations don't really do it for me. Many of the animations that play during the story will at times kind of look like they're animated with that After Effects puppet tool, which is not
Yes.
super
I know
excellent.
what you're talking about. Yeah.
This doesn't include the monster animations though. Those actually seem really fluid. But anyways, the puppet tool look, it's very similar to Machinarium in that way, but for some reason when you see it in Machinarium, it looks stylized, but when you see it in Creaks, it looks stilted.
Yeah. There's kind of like not enough points of articulation, kind of, and they're a little stiff looking. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's just because the characters in Creaks are organic instead of robots or something.
Maybe. Yeah.
I also don't really care much for most of the paintings, not visually speaking, but they really break up the pacing of the game. Some of them look really cool, and some of the mini games are actually incredibly clever. But other than offering a bit of whimsy here and there, I don't really feel like I gain too much. And some of them are pretty well hidden, and you don't really gain much by discovering the hidden ones, other than a check mark on the amount of paintings you found. And most of them, a majority of them are just in between rooms. Like you can't miss them, essentially. So I could have done without most of those. Ultimately, as far as puzzle games go, this one is a casual one. I loved every time that I had one of those like aha moments. But I think big puzzle fans will find this one to be pretty stale pretty quick. I came for the music and the art style, and I was satisfied with what I got. I even got a couple of Machinarium Easter eggs. I assume there's probably some Summer Rust
And
Easter
Chuchol.
eggs. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
I assume there's more, but
I super love that when developers do that.
I know, it's so great. But it didn't feel out of place when I saw the Machinarium ones. So I assume there's more. That put a huge smile on my face. After playing this, I'm still a huge fan of Amanita and their whole style. But beyond the art and the music, which I do love a lot, this one won't totally stand out in my mind moving forward. I give Creaks a very respectable 7.5 out of 10.
Nice. That's actually higher than I was expecting based on some of your criticisms, but I'm glad you overall like pretty much mostly enjoyed this one.
Yeah, it was a little bit lower when I first typed out my notes. I went back on it a little bit. But yeah, I listened to the whole soundtrack again today,
Cool.
so that plays a big part of it. Creaks is available physically on the Switch from Super Rare Games. That's how I played it, as well as the Machinarium, which I failed to mention in the Machinarium episode. It is also available on macOS, iOS, Steam, Xbox One, and PS4, which is where I played it the first time.
Nice. It's in a good variety of places. And my understanding is that there was actually a fundraiser of sorts with this game recently in raising money for efforts toward helping Ukraine.
Yeah. So Amanita Design is a Czech indie game company, so they're obviously a little bit closer to the whole situation there, and that is where I got my PS4 copy was during that fundraiser, and so that's when I played it for the first time.
Very nice. The overall setup of going underground and there being, a large creature, it's taking me back to when you talked about Creature in the Well. Like there's a little bit of synergy in some of your secret games this season too.
That's true. Yeah.
Like what are the odds of that?
It's even like in a just like visually, the creatures are sort of similar for part of the game.
Yeah. And then speaking of visuals, you talk about wanting to find that synergy between your secret game and the featured game, which I really appreciate. Again, like I think that's really cool that you do that. I just pick whatever the heck I want.
I know. Yeah.
I think that actually helps give us a good variety each episode. But the synergy I see with Kentucky Route Zero might be, and it's pretty minimal, but might be that reliance on a darker color palette. It's not the strongest connection, but that's the biggest connection I see here.
Yeah, I guess if we had to pick one,
if there was
that's
one.
the strongest one we've got.
Yeah. Well, that's DiscoCola's secret game, Creaks. And I don't usually have synergy with my secret game and the featured game, but you could argue that I have a pretty strong tie this time, and I didn't even think about this before I started playing my secret game, but both Kentucky Route Zero TV edition and my secret game are arguably definitive versions.
Okay.
So my secret game is Catlateral Damage Remeowstered.
No way.
Have you heard of this?
I have. There's a physical pre-order up for it right now as we're recording this.
Okay, so you're somewhat familiar with this title. So this was released in 2021. The original version of the game came out around 2015 before it was Remeowstered. And this is a first-person cat simulator. It was developed by ManicoWare and Firehose Games and published by ManicoWare. I'm going to read the game synopsis from the Steam storefront. Quote, "The premier first-person destructive house cat simulator is back with a vengeance. Play as a mischievous cat, swat your human's possessions onto the floor, scratch up curtains, smash precious keepsakes, and show your owner who's boss." End quote. So you play as a cat in this game. And I chose this because I wanted a cat follow-up to another secret game I had this season, Grapple Dog. I wanted a fun cat-focused game. I'm a dog and a cat owner, so this season I wanted to pick a couple games that celebrated those animals. And in the first person in this game, you jump, you can swat, you punch with your little paws, you can sprint, you can do like a dash forward, and you can play as one of 22 different cats, which is a pretty impressive selection. Yes.
Wow.
At first, you only have access to one, I believe, and then you unlock them one at a time. There are 3 modes in this game. There's goals mode, which it's kind of like the story mode almost, even though there's not really a story, but it's where you're going into all these stages and you have these very defined objectives. Every single player will have the same objectives in goals mode, and that's primarily how you unlock more things in this game. Then there's procedural mode, which is where there's a random seed applied to whatever stage preset you select, and it's going to randomize the furniture, the layout of the rooms, what objects are in the house. And so every time you play that, it's going to be different. And that ends up being the mode you use to farm collectibles later in the game once you finish goals mode. And then there's litter box mode, which is an endless mode that doesn't have any goals or restrictions. You can just kind of run around one of the base levels and
sandbox, but litter box.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yes. You picked up on that faster than I did, actually. The stages include a studio, an apartment, a log cabin, a modern home, a mansion. And through all of those base stages, you unlock bonus stages called the Supermarket, the Museum, the Box Paradise, Fur Rightful Lab, and Holiday Den. And when you're in these stages, your objectives are to topple over certain items. You'll be told to find your toys hiding around, sometimes requiring you to open up cupboards or fridges or closets to find hidden things. It might ask you to catch mice. Some stages have robot vacuums, those circular robot vacuums running around. And your objective is to simply hop on one of those and just ride it for a while. So a lot of things that cats are into, you're being asked to do in this game. And the thing that limits your ability to accomplish things in these stages is your energy bar. Once that energy bar runs out, the stage ends. And as you do certain actions like running around or swiping your paw or jumping, it's going to deplete a very small amount of that energy bar. You can upgrade your energy so that you have a bigger bar. You can also upgrade other stats like your speed and your jump and your swat power using collectibles that are basically treats that you find. So when you rack up enough of those, you can go into your upgrade menu, and there's kind of a very, very light RPG upgrade system going on here. And within the stages, you can restore your energy by napping in certain predetermined spots. You can eat cat grass and other treats to restore a little bit of energy there. So you start to strategize like when you should take a nap to restore a certain amount of energy so that you can get back into the fun of knocking stuff over. You can also pick up catnip, which will slow down time and you won't spend energy for a bit. And it gives this really psychedelic look to the screen. So it's basically you're getting high on catnip in this game. And then there are collectibles that are cat photos, and there are around 300 of them in the game. And these are realistic pictures of cats. And I actually don't know where they come from. I don't know if they're pictures of cats of some of the developers or people who might have backed the game on some Kickstarter-like fundraiser, or if they're just kind of random pictures of cats. But there are hundreds of cat photos that you can unlock by knocking over pictures of cats in the levels. And those are purely for collection purposes, but they're tied into achievements/trophies as well. So I really liked that this game celebrates both having and being a cat. You know, it definitely understands that world. And I can tell the people who put this game together love cats and that they're very passionate about cats. And there's an odd satisfaction with toppling everything you can in every single level. It's kind of a twist on some of my OCD tendencies. So rather than trying to make everything neat and put everything in its spot, everything is already in its spot, and I'm trying to ruin everything, right? So it's interesting to go through these levels and just think, what can I do to totally mess up this shelf? Or can I get all these things on this shelf onto the floor and all the stuff on the dresser? And can I go into the kitchen and get the knife block and the soap and the cereal box and all this stuff on the floor before my energy runs out? There's also like the scavenger hunt in disguise that's going on, because in the stages, you're getting these goals like find this toy, knock over this specific item, and then you start to look, and it's like an I Spy game. You're trying to find where that object is. You might observe that it's a certain book, and you start to realize, well, that book is probably in this bedroom or in the living room, but it's not going to be in the bathroom or the kitchen because those rooms don't have books in them. So there is a logic
There's a logic to
where the items are. Everything is realistically placed, even when you play the procedural mode. When things are randomized, there is still a science to where things are placed in that mode. So living room things will be in the living room, bathroom things will be in the bathroom, etc. There is a really good momentum with progression. You're constantly unlocking new stages, new cats, unlocking those pictures to look at that are really cute, stat boosts. There's a good variety in this game, not necessarily with what you're doing from moment to moment, but the kinds of objects there are. There are over 500 different items to topple over. There are impressive physics going on because you have a large number of objects in these levels that can all be toppled, and some of them have thousands of items all moving and toppling onto the floor simultaneously. I'm thinking specifically of like a museum level and the supermarket level, where there are just hundreds and thousands of items, and you can swat them all onto the floor. They'll react to each other if they bump into each other. And the game doesn't chug. It keeps up with the activity you're doing. So that's very impressive for me. This game has a lot of humor. When the stages start in goals mode, it will show your cat before you go into first person. The camera swings around you, and the cat will have a thought bubble, usually saying something like, "My litter box hasn't been cleaned in hours. Time to make the humans pay." And it's juxtaposed with this really happy, peppy music. And now the cat will just do harm to this room. And it's just, I find that really cute and funny. Unlocking photos in the gallery is fun. You knock over those realistic photos of cats, and it's funny to see a realistic picture in the environment where everything else is rendered with kind of a cartoonish look.
Super like low poly.
Yes.
Not super low poly, but
not a lot of detail.
Yeah.
It's very minimal. And then I thought a nice little touch with all of the stages I was doing and all of the collecting I was doing, I found that I unlocked all of my upgrades pretty early on before I was done with a lot of the trophies in this game. And I had all these extra cat treats, and I thought there was nothing for me to spend them on. So I was just racking up hundreds of these treats. I thought, oh, that's a little unbalanced. Like maybe the upgrade should cost more if I'm going to amass all of these treats. But I found out you can use your extra treats to unlock some of those photos in the gallery.
Good.
So you can spend like 5 treats or 10 treats, something like that, to unlock each photo that you're missing. And so that really cuts down the time that you would otherwise spend hours doing looking for those photos to get those trophies.
Yeah.
Nice little touches too. Like I played this on PS5 and on the DualSense on PS5, there's certain little touches like when you take a nap to recover energy, your controller will vibrate and the haptics will activate in a way that feels like purring.
Yeah.
And I love that. Yeah.
Yes.
So something they totally didn't have to do, just as easily might not have thought of, and they did that in this game. And then other little touches like when you are on a load screen, it will give you a random cat fact, so I like those things. Things I didn't find particularly strong, the progression with item variety is great, but the core gameplay really doesn't change over the several hours that you might spend playing this game. At the core of it, you are a cat in first person swatting things, and it's fun the whole time you're doing it, but it just doesn't evolve too much, even though you upgrade the power of your swat, even though you can get a double jump, even though you get a move to charge forward, you're still kind of just mashing the shoulder buttons to do that swat or that punch. The jumping can feel a little stiff. There's a little trial and error sometimes when you want to get to a high ledge or a skinny ledge. You just don't have a lot of aiming and a lot of precision with that jump. And then sometimes hitting things with your paw, I think that could use a little more oomph and momentum. I would want to knock something across the room, and I might not be able to do that until I upgrade my SWAT to the fullest level, if that makes sense. So the music is fun with its pop instrumentals, but it can get really loopy and tiresome quickly. And then I had some issues with some trophies not unlocking. And for some people, yes.
Oh no, another pet game that does this.
I know. What is the deal? I had that happen in season 1 with Balthazar's Dream, but wasn't nearly as bad for me with this game. All it required me to do was close the game and restart the game, and it recalculated on the main menu, it recalculated my totals or something, and it just started popping trophies I should have been getting. But I read online, other people have needed to like uninstall the game or restart a save file. So I didn't get that unlucky with that. There is a trophy for knocking over 20,000 items. And when I finished all the other trophies in the game, I was at like 3 hours played or something like that. I was only at 6,000 items knocked over. So I had to knock over another 14,000 items. And the way you do this is you have to go to a level that has just tons of really small things tightly packed together. That's the best way to farm this number. And so I went to the supermarket level where they have tons of things sitting on the shelves. And I had to do that for like 2 hours to get the rest of the items. So there's just an imbalance there.
A third of your total playtime?
Basically, a third, maybe more than that, maybe a little bit more. So just a little unbalanced with the achievement/trophies. I know plenty of listeners probably don't care about that kind of thing. So overall, Catlateral Damage, Remeowstered, it's a fun distraction. There's a lot to appreciate if you're a cat person, but if you're not, there's still a satisfaction in seeing how much can you knock over with your allotted energy in a stage. The game does get a little samey, but you're always collecting or improving your stats, so the repetition is still a little worthwhile. I'm going to give this a 6.5 out of 10. I was kind of between that and 7, so a pretty strong 6.5 on this thing. It's playable on PC, Mac, Linux, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, which is how I played it, and Xbox One.
Excellent. Well, there's actually more synergy than everything you mentioned, but I have notes on that piece of synergy anyway, so we'll talk about that in Kentucky Route. This game, looking at the trailer and looking at some gameplay footage while you were talking, it made me think of like 4 different games all at once. First game I thought of was Katamari Damacy.
Yes.
The second game I thought of was I Am Toast. Is it I Am Toast or I Am Bread?
I Am Bread.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the second thing I thought of.
That's funny.
But as you were talking about it, I also thought of Untitled Goose Game.
Yes.
So like I'm kind of just throwing these all in a
Oh my
pot
goodness.
and mixing them all together.
I think that is so accurate. I think the Katamari Damacy one crossed my mind, but I did not think of those other ones. And you're totally right. It is like a melting pot of all those things.
Yeah. Just the mischief of it from Goose Game, but the environment of I Am Bread and
yeah, and being in a private perspective of like nobody's home and I'm the only thing that's alive at home doing whatever I want. That aspect of I Am Bread. Yeah.
Yeah. I also, I guess, thought of Mr. Mosquito, but that's like,
yes.
I haven't played that, so I can't accurately.
I played that back in the day on PS2. And yeah, I think that could be added to the list in some way, maybe not as strong, but yeah.
Wow. Cool. Yeah. Like I said, there's a pre-order open for it for the physical edition right now as we're recording this. I might get it. I wasn't super. I love cats.
Yes.
Spoiler alert for the listening audience. I haven't had a chance to talk about it too much. I'm big time cat person. I'm one of those. If I would have known about it, I would have gotten my cats in the game somehow. But
I totally recommend this to you as a cat person. I know I didn't rate it the highest score I've ever given, but I still think this is really worthwhile to most people.
Yeah,
I mean, because a 6.5 for me is still a positive score. Yeah.
Yeah, in general, I don't typically enjoy games like this, just as a whole. But it's a cat. I might, and you seem to have a lot of fun with it. There's more collectibles than I would have. It keeps track of everything you swat, like Katamari does.
I was very impressed with the stats screen in this game. It does keep track of lots of things behind the scenes, which I was really pleased with. You might be curious about differences from the original 2015 version, just Catlateral damage, vanilla version.
Let's hear it.
So this new one, they improved a lot. There's a complete progression redesign, more objects to topple and interact with, more pet photos than the original. So the original didn't have the close to 300 number. New tasks thrown into the mix for the goals. Persistent stat boosts and abilities. I guess the stat boosts weren't permanent before. Or they didn't have them. Revamped cat models and animations, overall improvements to UI, animations, and effects. So just like technical and design improvements all across the board.
Awesome.
In this. Also, I mentioned I have a cat. My cat is a black cat. All the cats look different that you can play as. There's a cat called Catzilla, and it's the only cat in the game that's just a pure black cat. And I unlocked him kind of last because he was last in the list, I think. But I used him to farm all of those items that I needed to get to 20,000. And one of my favorite gaming experiences this season has actually been doing that farming, even though it is kind of tedious, but with my black cat sitting on my lap the whole time.
Oh, excellent.
And he kind of watched me playing, and then he took a nap on me while I was playing a black cat in this game. I love that.
That's awesome.
And also, there is a really fun level called Box Paradise. And this is like every cat's paradise. It is a level of boxes everywhere because cats love jumping into boxes. And this level is very unique because there are tons of crevices and tiny spaces, and there are box towers, tons of boxes strewn out across this huge room. And I've thought about doing that for my own cat for his birthday, just like collecting a bunch of cardboard boxes and then laying them out in various combinations all over the house and just watching him have fun and explore his box city. And this game had that idea too, I guess before I did. So that was fun to see as well.
That's awesome.
So those are our secret games, Creaks and Catlateral Damage Remeowstered. Let's move on to our review of Kentucky Route Zero TV Edition. It is our featured game. Kentucky Route Zero TV Edition was fully finished and realized in 2020. It's made up of 5 acts, and the first act was released in 2013. So this is a game 7 years in the making. It is a non-traditional atmospheric adventure game developed by Cardboard Computer and published by Cardboard Computer. I'll read the game synopsis from the Nintendo Switch storefront.
Okay.
Since that's one of the places where you can play the TV edition, otherwise known as the console edition. Quote, Kentucky Route Zero TV edition is a magical realist adventure game in 5 acts, featuring a haunting electronic score and a suite of hymns and bluegrass standards recorded by the Bedquilt Ramblers, rendered in a striking visual style that draws as much from theater, film, and experimental electronic art as it does from the history of video games. This is a story of unpayable debts, abandoned futures, and the human drive to find community. End quote. So that's this edition of Underplayed. That did the whole work that we need to set up this game. But we'll give a little bit more information here. So the game's 5 acts were released over a period of 7 years, starting in 2013. Cardboard Computer is made up of 3 developers, Jake Elliott, Tomas Kamensky, and Ben Babbitt. And the team released several supplemental experiences online between the acts over the years, which were pulled in as interludes between the acts in the final version of this game. So the PC edition and the TV edition. The TV edition has that sister release in the PC edition. I don't know that they have a lot of differences other than the PC edition kind of is considered to have come first because that's the platform where all of these acts were released over 7 years.
Right.
So when they released that 5th act, that's simultaneously when they released the console edition. The biggest differences are you're using a controller on the TV edition, not a mouse and keyboard, as far as I know. There might be other differences that weren't in my research. But in this game, it is taking place in a fictionalized version of Kentucky, roughly northeast of Bowling Green near Mammoth Cave National Park. It follows this man named Conway, who's with his dog, and they're in an antique furniture delivery truck. They're making a final delivery for the company Conway works for, Lizette's Antiques, and he's looking for an address called 5 Dogwood Drive. And Conway learns very quickly that he needs to navigate to Route 0 to find his destination. And along the way, Conway encounters many characters from various walks of life who join him. And eventually, as the player, you control an ensemble, and Conway sort of loses his place as the central protagonist. You encounter Shannon, who's a TV repairwoman. There's Ezra, who's a young boy whose family vanished. There is a duo called Junebug and Johnny, who are 2 robotic musicians. And then there are tons of tertiary characters that we can kind of get into later if they come up. But I would say that is sort of the core group that you're seeing and hearing from a lot in this game. So this is an adventure game, really rich with text, dialogue. You're playing in the third person perspective a lot of the time. It's a wide perspective. Often you're walking around lightly, but mostly choosing dialogue. And this is unlike traditional adventure games because you don't pick up a lot of items. And you can often pick lines of dialogue from multiple characters. You can often get a selection of not only what a character says, but which character you choose to speak next.
Mm-hmm.
And there aren't any apparent grand choices in the dialogue options you're choosing. Unlike other adventure games where you would make a selection and it would change what you see next or what you see down the road, a lot of times you're also changing history. You're telling a character's story and their past, and whatever you choose between a list of 2 or 3 choices, that just becomes fact. And that is how that character's life always was. A standout example, the earliest, probably most clear example of this is when Conway is asked what his dog's name is.
Mm-hmm.
And you can choose for the dog to not have a name. You can choose for the dog to be a female and her name's Blue, or you can choose for the dog to be male and his name's Homer. And you choose one of those, and that's what the dog is for the rest of the game. And then the game takes place in this rural, quiet, pastoral part of Kentucky, and it often takes place at or around twilight. So it's often very dark wherever you are. You do go inside several buildings throughout this thing, but you're also outdoors quite a bit. Also, much of the game has a magical realism element, meaning there's this matter-of-fact presentation of fantastic and mythical things, but much of the presentation is dominated by our real world and how our real world functions. And characters are aware of what we would consider fictional, but it's accepted and not really called out. And so it feels kind of like an experimental play in an adventure game form. Is there any other way you would set up this game to somebody who's never played Kentucky Route Zero?
Well, when I was looking into it to try and find my synergy, a lot of things I heard were like point and click. There's some of those elements there, but it honestly, it felt more to me like a choose your own adventure
Mhm.
game, like from the old like computer games, like
Yeah.
that, like kind of like that. Sort of like Xanadu, and that's when that really like stood out for me.
Yeah.
So I would say that there's a lot of that vibe in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, a lot of the environments aren't that sprawling. You're often given the choice of like, who should you talk to next? But you might end up talking to those 2 or 3 people anyway. It's just kind of what order you choose to talk to them in. So not a lot of like big choices and open-endedness to what you can do in a lot of the stages. So DiscoCola, I know you're not one to usually enjoy works of art that feel like plays. So like movies that feel like plays, games that feel like plays. That's something you've told me outside of this podcast. I also know you don't like to read like reams worth of text in your games. You mentioned that briefly in our Doki Doki Literature Club Plus review, but online I'm seeing tons of praise for this game for attempting to portray feelings and places and characters over a traditional story. So overall, did you find what this game was trying to do effective? Did you get drawn in? And what were your overall thoughts on Kentucky Route Zero TV edition?
Okay. Well, yeah, the act interlude and interlude format was definitely something I haven't really experienced before in video games, and I do have mixed feelings on it because of all of those things that you mentioned. I liked some of the interludes. I disliked others. The one that I'm thinking of the most takes place in the bar. The interlude that takes place in a bar,
Which is truly set up to emulate the feeling of being in a play.
Yes.
Not necessarily looking like watching a play, but you're actually a side character in a play.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I both liked and disliked that. I disliked the feeling of the play. Like you said, I don't typically enjoy things that feel like plays, especially one room plays, one setting plays. Super not a huge fan of that.
Sure.
I don't need to go into it too much, but I feel like it pushes too much unrealistic dialogue to make up for the fact that there's no setting change or action or anything. Anyways, I don't have to go into that. But I also liked that one the most in terms of what was being portrayed, what was being talked about. I felt that mattered the most in terms of like
Sure.
what the characters were talking about.
What is going on in that interlude thematically ties into so much of what the core game is, and that's just an interlude. So it is very unlike the rest of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So that bulk of the game where you're in that third person, wide perspective, walking around, talking and making dialogue choices, what are your overall feelings on that?
Unfortunately, it's some of the same. You talked about the ensemble, and you mentioned all of the core characters, and I liked for the most part, all of the core characters. But you have all these tertiary characters, and I know that they're tertiary because I don't remember any of their names. I cannot remember their names at all. These characters sometimes will appear suddenly, and I was totally unable to keep track of how they joined us and where they were going. Just that I would see their name pop up, and I would struggle to remember who this was. And maybe that's just me, and I'm just have such terrible reading comprehension skills.
Yeah.
But I did struggle keeping track of everybody
And
after a while.
I'll also add that the character models don't have a lot of expressiveness in especially their faces because it's the style where the face is blank. You're
Yeah.
seeing what they wear, you're seeing their body shape, you see their hair, but you're not seeing what they look like on their face, which is probably important when you have the number of characters that this game has. And also, when a character speaks with the text block on screen, it's not attributing the text to the character model.
Mhm.
It has that look of a text bubble with like a rectangle and then a small triangle on the underside, but that's not moving between the characters.
Right.
So you kind of have to use context clues to figure out, oh, this person's Maya because the person on this side of the screen would say that.
Right. I wrote down later in my notes that like I think acting probably would have helped. A lot of extensive work on the part of the
Oh, yeah.
development team to do that. But voice acting, I think, definitely would have alleviated a lot of my frustrations with keeping track of characters. But if we're talking overall thoughts, I think this game excels the most in its depiction of economic hardship. I think depictions of economic class in most media is often out of touch, especially when it comes to like lower income characters and lower income lives. Just never hits the mark right, I think. I'm gonna dive into other pieces of media here, but like for the longest time, the show that I thought did it best was Malcolm in the Middle. And I think that show, more than any other I've seen, shows what it's really like to be stuck in a lower income. But even then, it is still a sitcom at the end of the day, and most of those issues don't carry over into the next episode. But money and economic hardship was an obstacle in those episodes as a barrier to get to the end point. And I think Kentucky Route Zero unseats Malcolm in the Middle as having a more realistic representation of that lower income life. At least in terms of media that I've consumed, I haven't seen it done more accurately than it is in Kentucky Route Zero. Even with that magical surrealism that you get, especially with like Conway's character, if you took that part of it away, it's very realistic. This is what happens to a lot of people that you don't see in media. Just because it's not interesting, maybe, or too depressing. I don't agree with that. I wish that poor people were more accurately depicted in media more often. Because I think when you don't depict it accurately, it sort of devalues the struggle of what it's actually like to be a low income person.
Right. And accuracy always matters when you're representing a class or a group of people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think Kentucky Route just tackled that and the way it affects all these different kinds of people and all the different ways that it can affect people. I think it tackled that much better than anything I've seen. I do kind of think that they lost sight of that by the end of the game. It was like a theme throughout the entirety for sure, but like at the end, I kind of felt it narrowed its focus into like one or two big bad corporations instead of just like the realistic situation of, being pooped on from all sides in this entire, economic system.
Yeah, I think those themes are really consistently addressed in like halfway through maybe Act 2 through like a good amount of Act 4. So like a good like middle portion of this game is you're constantly being hit with that.
Yeah, and I think I'm thinking specifically of like when they're looking for the doctor. That is when I really like felt that that someone on the team had lived it because it felt that real.
And there's actually a part specifically with the doctor that gave me goosebumps and actually made me feel for the character in that moment who had to talk to him. We could talk a little bit more about that later, maybe.
But yeah, continuing with general thoughts, I appreciate the use of tons of different types of broadcast equipment. I talked about it in one of our horror games. I don't remember which, but I love it when they use that in like a horror angle. I love using old broadcast equipment as a horror angle, but just in general, when you can use like CRT televisions or radios or
Yeah.
something like that throughout your story to effectively tell the story to. Love that. You can tell that someone on the team probably worked in broadcasting at some point.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that.
I'm thinking specifically of the interlude with WEVP, and there's a specific caller that calls into the show. You can't write that unless you lived it because it's so accurate.
Yeah. The person who drones on too long doesn't know how much of a nuisance they're being. Nobody is talking back. They're just kind of on this monologue.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
You have to have lived that. I love the music, especially the bluegrass tunes. And I get to play as a cat for a little while.
Yeah.
Huge points for that.
I guess that is good synergy.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
However, they did tie the hardest achievement to that section of the game, and cats already kind of get a bad rap for no reason.
Yeah.
So that didn't help. But
The map.
Yeah.
The map.
In general, I think it was a cool way to play as a cat. But yeah, the game makes me think of hopelessness, helplessness, impermanence, legacy, longing. It almost made me meditate on the meaning of life, but I couldn't quite focus on that meditation while I was trying to remember where I was going or which characters I met. So while there's a lot of great content, commentary, and ideas, I unfortunately didn't really enjoy myself for most of the game. I don't think this one is for me. I think I would have preferred to watch a playthrough instead.
Okay. So what do you score Kentucky Route Zero TV edition?
I give Kentucky Route Zero a 6.5 out of 10 for me.
All right. Well, I still am glad that there are some themes that resonated with you very strongly with this one.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I think there's a lot to pull away from this, and I think everybody will take away something different or observe different things. I think I did recognize a lot of those aspects. I might not comment on them as much because I have more to say on what images and scenes and sequences stood out for me in both positive and negative ways. So my overall thoughts on Kentucky Route Zero, I think this is a melancholic and slow and sometimes befuddling game. And it reflects on things I don't always care about, and not necessarily the themes you spoke to, but I'm talking about just kind of small, inconsequential details about side characters' backstories, you know, that don't really play a part in the grand scheme of things. It often has those moments, but it also has a really quiet beauty to it, and it feels like nothing else I've experienced in a game. When I started this game, I started playing it on a weeknight around 8:39 at night, and I think that's a really great time of day to play this because a lot of this game takes place during those twilight hours, and if you can be in a place where you don't have any distractions, where it's probably a little bit darker in your environment, and you can just focus on this game, I think you will gel with what's going on, especially in Act 1.
Yeah.
I think I was in the perfect zone to get started with this game in Act 1 because it has nice pacing. It provides the best sample of what the overall game is. So I ended up really loving Act 1. And I was like, I get what this game is. I understood very quickly that this is not a traditional game. This is not a traditional adventure game or game in general. And I ended up enjoying Act 1 as an experience, which is kind of a cliche thing to say.
But I think that's what this game was built to be anyway.
Yeah. And the thing that adds to that is that scenes that you're in within the acts, they often feel like these little vignettes, these little dioramas almost. You're in these wide shots where everything is very carefully placed and everything has a beauty to it, but it's also dark. And there are striking images, like I think of the Equus Oils gas station, the first environment you're in. The way that place looks, that is cemented in my mind, and certain other places we can talk about in a little bit. I also agree with you about the music. The Bed Quilt Ramblers music is beautiful. I would often sit and listen to their music when I had the option to move on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you have to sit and listen to that
course.
stuff. And sometimes you were forced to listen to the music, and I just loved those parts. Those were some of my favorite moments. There's a great characterization in chapter 4 when you're on the Mucky Mammoth, lots of places and choices of who to follow. If you're in a rush to finish the game, that's not a good time to play Act 4 because it can be the longest chapter in the game by far. But that's where you get a lot of insight into certain characters that you have been following. I also enjoyed that there was this recognition of those smaller characters at one point, and then they might come back later. And there's a little bonus for you if you happen to remember those characters' names. It wasn't always necessary, though. So it didn't feel like if I forgot this minor character who showed up later and I vaguely remembered their name, I never got frustrated because I knew it wasn't necessary to remember that. But I appreciated that there was that little extra there for people paying attention. This game ultimately won me over in its bookends. Act 1 and Act 5. They're the acts that I loved the most. Act 1 is a great encapsulation of what this game is, like I said. And Act 5 is an unexpectedly, beautifully poignant look at this town. And it has a nice contrast to what comes before it. So really appreciated Act 1 and Act 5. I think most of my frustrations happened in Acts 2, 3, and 4. And I don't think any two people will have the exactly same experience.
I don't see how you can.
With how many options there are of what to pick dialogue-wise, I don't know that you'd be able to immediately tell what two people's big differences are in their playthroughs. But yeah, I think there are so many variables in this game that other games we've played, like Outer Wilds, no two people will play this game exactly the same.
Yeah.
Some of my dislikes, at times, Kentucky Route Zero is just a little bit too much or a little bit too little to wrap my mind around, and I don't know which one it is. Do you understand what I mean by that?
I know exactly what you mean by that. I fell more in the too much camp, but then at times I was just like, no, dive into this more, please.
Yeah.
This is interesting.
And maybe it varies act to act, but sometimes I would think, man, there's a lot going on in this that I am just not getting. It's over my head, or there's not enough happening. And I couldn't decide. I agree with you that some of the tertiary characters are introduced very minimally, if at all. Some characters just show up, and that's a little frustrating because I don't like that moment of trying to understand who a new character is while I'm also just trying to understand what the other characters are saying. And that happens a lot.
Yeah.
As you get later on, that happens a lot in Act 3 and 4, I think.
Yep.
Oh, it happens a lot in Act 5 too, which is one of my favorite acts because there are entirely new people there too. But I also don't really have a concept of how much I ended up missing through my actions. When I select something, I am not selecting something else. And I don't know what that inaction of not selecting that thing, I don't know what it would have led me to. And so I don't know the scale of what I missed in this game. That's a mystery to me. And so maybe that is supposed to encourage me to do a replay, which I'll have to do partially to get the platinum in this game. But I wish I kind of understood the grander scale of what this experience has. If it is that much grander. Act 3 kind of lost me, especially with the Hall of the Mountain King area and Xanadu, which is the game within the game that you mentioned.
Yeah.
It's a text-based adventure. I got lost with that. And around the middle of Act 4, I started to skim read a little bit when I was listening to the characters that hadn't been properly introduced. The people who run the boat.
Yeah.
A lot of those people. The interludes were hit or miss for me as well. I really enjoyed the concepts of what they were. They often gave me a glimpse into a very specific part of the world. And I really liked the ones that gave me a glimpse into the act that I was going to enter into. So I really liked the one that preceded Act 5, the one in
in WEVP.
WEVP.
Yeah.
I liked that because it made the impact of what I observed in Act 5 more powerful.
Exactly.
I mean, it was almost heartbreaking to see that and to see what led to it. And I can connect the dots there, So overall, Kentucky Route Zero, it's a hard game to talk about, as you can probably tell with my rambling. But I think it feels like a series of atmospheric television, kind of like Twin Peaks. And that's what I said about Night in the Woods in
Mhm.
season 1. You never know what the game will say or what it will show you next. There is a lot of reading involved, but the dialogue is very thoughtfully written. I would recommend this to people who don't mind trading a traditional story for more of an experiential portrayal of a place with lots of character and thematic commentary underneath. I appreciate it more after playing it than the moment I was playing it. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts, I think.
Mm. Mhm.
So I was kind of going between 7.5 and 8 on
Oh,
this.
okay.
I'm going to give it a 7.5 this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just going back to like what you said about the interludes that precede, what's going to happen. The one that I was talking about that takes place in the bar, that plays a role in stuff that happens down the line. Whereas there was like an interlude that seemed totally inconsequential and
Was it the telephone one?
yeah,
The Act 3 interlude called Here and There Along the Echo, where you're doing a phone call service about the Echo River stops.
right.
Yeah, which makes sense about what it's cluing you into, but it was a little distant for me.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
even the one that follows Act 5, like it was a nice way to end, I guess. Just oh,
Yeah. I just felt a little detached
Yeah.
because of how little we're seeing
exactly.
and how much we're reading there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess between that interlude and then Act 5 gave me one of my favorite lines that I forgot about until you were talking about it. It was just like, for once, I'd like to be at the beginning of something instead of the end.
Mm.
And that was incredible to read because I won't go into it too much, but we're seeing a couple of things end in our own personal lives. And we were there for the beginning, but it's just there's always that fear, especially with a lot of the things I'm involved in. It's just like this stuff could end at any time, especially because of economic pressures, which is a theme in this game. It
Yeah.
made me feel it stood out in my mind because of a lot of the things that are so fragile. And
Mhm.
I think fragility is a good word. If I was to use one buzzword to describe this game, it may be fragility.
Yeah. You were talking about you almost contemplated the meaning of life in this game. Like
Mhm.
you almost got to that spot. You were talking about all the themes and like the feelings, emotions you were feeling with this one. And I think what I came away with, especially closer to the end, similar to contemplating life, but when it focuses less on Conway and it starts to focus more on this ensemble and this community and then this town at the end, I found the very final scenes to be very impactful, the scenes that I'll probably carry with me the most. And I started to think like with community, life goes on. There's a lot of hardship and a lot
Mhm.
of troubles, a lot of despair, but life still goes on. And I think a lot of games would not be able to get away with this ensemble thing, but this game finds a way to through tying those themes into having that many characters. Especially because, not to spoil too much, but one of the final scenes is there's kind of a memorial service. There's a service for two animals
Mhm.
that pass away. And I shouldn't care about that so much, but it was more about the togetherness of that moment that I really found impactful and emotional. I think when you make choices on what to say, ultimately it might not change a whole lot in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
What I mean by that is like, yeah, you can choose for a character to say two completely different weird things, but you're still heading toward the same general conclusion, I think. And so I was wondering if you think this game is saying that choices are incidental or if they're important, or is it important to care about your choices in this game since it is such a non-traditional adventure experience?
Hmm. Well, I think you're right in that maybe choices don't matter, and you can tie that back into what I think is the strongest theme of the game, which is the economic hardship. because there are some people you just doesn't matter what you do, you're just stuck,
Mhm.
and you can try and you can try and you can try. A lot of what's going to pull you out of that is luck. So
Mhm.
maybe there is a little bit of that, but I think there's reason to care. Like I found myself really examining my dialogue options because it's like I wanted to know which one resonated with me the most.
Mm.
And I took great care in figuring out which, maybe
Yeah.
inconsequential in the end. But I tried to follow what I felt would be the most realistic flow of a conversation that I would be involved in, which unfortunately meant that I didn't pick a lot of Ezra's dialogue options.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, poor kid.
But I did pay attention to times when I was shaping his history.
Hmm.
That happens a couple times, like what happened with his family,
Right.
and his feelings on it. I feel like I was responding in a personal way. Not that that has happened to me, but I was trying to imagine if I were in his shoes, what would I say? So
Right.
I did find myself caring about
Exactly.
those things when there was kind of a lot at stake to establish what a character's path was in life. Yeah.
Yeah, I tried to think, well, if I was 10 or whatever, how old he is,
Yeah.
and my parents suddenly disappeared, like, what would I say? If it was that recent or it had been a while, like,
Yeah.
what would I say in that moment? And I did take great care in trying to put myself in all those different shoes.
I wanted to ask you a surprise question.
Oh, right, yes.
What is the first thing that comes to your mind that you did in this game that you haven't done before in a game?
Scraped mold off of a crystal to make a machine work. um,
I think that's a good one.
yeah, I
think that's a good
mean,
one.
I struggled just from a gameplay perspective. I struggled a lot with perspective and camera. Unfortunately, that's not the first time that I've struggled with something like that, but I struggled in a different way, I guess.
Expound. Is that because you were playing what might be a PC focused adventure title translated to the console using sticks on a controller and that was a little off or something?
Maybe I think because, and you said it a lot, it's such a wide perspective oftentimes.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of one area specifically where you have to climb up this hill to a house.
Yes, the Marquez
Yeah.
farm.
Yeah. And I found myself like, going left and then going right at what I thought was the right angle.
Yeah.
But it wasn't going. So I struggled with perspective at times,
Okay.
just like visually. But yeah.
I've never seen a boardroom full of bears. No, that's not actually my answer. There's a lot of ways this game plays with the presentation
Mhm.
of an adventure game, and I think it gets more experimental with that as the game goes on. I think
I agree.
as the years went on in this development cycle, I think they became more comfortable with switching things up and trying new ways to display text and ways to show characters and environments and things. So I think of like Act 4, there's a moment where two characters go hunting for mushrooms,
Mhm.
and you have two dialogue trees going on
Oh
at once.
yeah,
Did
that
you
was
get
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That didn't happen anywhere else in the game for me. So I thought that was interesting.
I guess I never felt more comfortable not exploring the full scope of an area I was in. Usually when you have a 3D environment, I feel like I need to find every corner. But I've got the sense very, very early on that you don't necessarily miss much by just going to your objective.
Yeah. You might miss little incidental pieces of dialogue. You might miss a trophy / achievement here and there because some require you to go a little bit out of bounds.
Yeah,
but
I still have some of those to clean up, but
Yeah. Same.
yeah. So I'm thinking of like when we got to the rum colony, maybe.
Yeah.
You can
On the beach,
Yeah.
on the sand.
yeah you can explore that area. You don't really need to, but it's like one of the only places in the game that sort of doesn't reward you for doing it, but you actually have something to do
Mhm.
when you explore the area.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it doesn't matter in the end. Most of these choices seem inconsequential, as you said.
There is a song performance that takes place in Act 3 at the lower depths, where you're watching Junebug and Johnny perform on stage, and you're actually selecting their lyrics in real time as the song is going on. That is something I've never done in the game.
Super cool.
That was one of my favorite sequences in the game, one of those memorable things. I think that's what a lot of people come away with from this game. So I think in every act, there is something that is memorable, which is really good. There's that consistency and that variety throughout. I wanted to just ask, what are the scenes that are memorable for you? What are the sequences that are memorable for you, if you haven't mentioned them already?
Yeah, I would say the one you're talking about at the lower depths, the interlude at the lower depths, not necessarily memorable because I loved it necessarily, but it stands out as being something I hadn't experienced in a game. And the first time that you see Julian, that stands out in my mind.
Oh, yeah.
It's very visually striking.
Absolutely. Yes, Julian, the brother of Ezra.
Yeah,
yes.
Yep. And waking up after meeting the doctor as Conway.
Thank you for bringing that back up, yes.
And the scenes that sort of follow that as you see his body change, I would say.
Yeah. Without
spoiling things.
That scene with the doctor, that was one moment where I just got a pit in my stomach as you saw little hints of what he was saying to Conway and what the implications were of the act of going to him. And, you know, I've had to go to the emergency room before for something pretty minor, and it's a shocking thing. And it's one of my big fears. I think it's a lot of people's fears, is just needing, not necessarily being in an event that causes you to go to the ER, but what happens after? Like, what is my life going to look like because of the services that I need? And that was bringing me back. So I think this game could probably deserve a trigger warning for some people. If you've been in an experience that was traumatizing, that was also a financial hardship for you, this might require that. And then I was doing some research. I found a comment on YouTube from somebody who lives in Kentucky, roughly in the version of this place that exists in real life. And they claim that this concept of the zero, it's not completely fictional. In that area, next to Mammoth Cave National Park, there is a mixture of natural and human-made paths that have been used for various purposes for decades, a long time. And that's where there's this kind of blurring the line of fiction and truth. And the concept of the zero is actually something that exists in people's minds there, which I think is really fascinating. So might be worth doing more research on. And I think if you look at some of the companies in this game, like Consolidated Power and Hard Times Distillery, there's a lot to understand about our world through this game and to understand a certain perspective that I think you've really touched on in our review. So I think it's a pretty difficult game to discuss, but I appreciate all of your thoughts on it.
Yeah, same.
So that is our review of Kentucky Route Zero TV Edition. You can play some version of the game on PC, Mac, Linux, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One, whether it's the PC or TV edition. DiscoCola rated it a 6.5. I rated it a 7.5. That's the end of this episode of Underplayed. You can find more of our episodes at kzum.org/underplayed and on common podcast services like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Our music was composed by Jack Rodenberg, and our art comes from Onimochi. Underplayed is on Twitter at UnderplayedPod. You can find me on Twitter at BoPo. That's BO_PO. And check out that same handle on the GG app where you can see my game lists and what I'm currently playing.
And I am at DiscoCola on Twitter and on Twitch, streaming eventually again with these secret and featured games.
Next time, we will have 2 more secret games, and our featured review will cover another game with a long title, Momodora Reverie Under the Moonlight, a Metroidvania that will make my hands hurt, developed by Bomb Service. Until then, everyone, keep on playing.